only go with me. Lay any burden on me, only sustain me, and sever any tie in my heart, except the tie that binds my heart to yours. If you have men who will only come if they know there is a good road, I don't want them. I want men who will come if there is no road at all. I will go anywhere, provided it is forward. David Livingston.
Thank you so much. So I'm happy to say, in welcoming all of you to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, this conversation circle that we have at Still and Moving Center every Saturday, that we have a double header coming up this weekend next. The two topics seem so well matched to one another, and this week's speaker graciously agreed to take them both on because they really, I think, are going to be a very well-matched pair. This week will be the theme of consciousness of divine will. And then next week, we will be looking into our true calling, our Svadharma. This week and next week, Piyush Kumar is going to speak for us. He works in the tech industry. He's up in the Seattle, Washington area, and he's originally from India. He is from the tradition, the Hindu tradition of Kashmiri Shaivism, and he has taken in many, many other perspectives over the course of his life and returned back to Kashmiri Shaivism from, I think, a much broader perspective. And he will largely, I think, focus on that. But did you also say you're going to speak from the mythological tradition this week as well?
Well, specifically from the writings of Sri Aurobindo. He was a saint that existed about 100 years ago, and very prolific writer, and saint in many ways. And his writings have greatly influenced me, so I bring that as well. He was primarily from south of India. He spent some time in the UK, and that's why most of his writings are in English, which is quite rare for an Indian mystic to write in English. But he was one of
them. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to let you just dive into it, and then once Piyush has had a chance to give his presentation, that's just the start of us all having this conversation on this topic of consciousness of divine will. So Piyush, if you could take it away for us.
Well, thank you, Renee, and it's just like always such a pleasure to be here and share the space with you. And as it always happens, Renee, I feel like you reach out, with specific topics right at the time when it's very poignant in my life as well. And so something about that synchronicity and synergy that I'm just, appreciating in this moment. And also for me to also keep track of the time that, the time for the talk, how long should I aim for?
If you could finish up by, if you're on the West Coast, which I am, about 6:30, that'd be great. Okay. That'll give us half an hour to converse.
Amazing. That would be great. Okay, so the consciousness of the divine will. Well, speaking a little bit more about the traditions that has influenced sort of my connection with this topic and with the space in general. So, as when I was very graciously talking about Kashmiri Shaivism. So Kashmiri Shaivism is a mystic tradition. It originated, I would say the current version of Kashmiri Shaivism originated about in 8th century AD. And this is also considered in many places the Renaissance, in many traditions, the Renaissance of the mystic era, specifically the Eastern mysticism. So the Sufi traditions, the Kashmiri Shaivism traditions, the mystic Buddhism traditions, as well as some of the Taoist philosophies. Something about 8th century AD, if you track back, of many of the writings and the books and just these knowledges that we connect with, we find them dated around that time. Um, and it was truly, in many ways, a mystical tradition rather than a tradition that belonged to, or even like that era. It was a mystical era rather than an era that belonged to a particular religion or a particular sect. Reason being, people just found something about that place in the Himalayas that people found a lot of resonance with how they could connect with themselves and the divine. And that's probably one of the reasons, people have this idea of going to the Himalayas and getting enlightenment and so on. So, there is some connection with that. So, you can imagine, Iran, currently Afghanistan, and the northern India, they were all like that big kind of region. And it's really beautiful up there. It's pretty amazing. Um, and when we talk about connecting with the divine and divinity, that's somehow being there, it gives you that access, some energy of the space itself. And then likewise, the other mystical saint that existed, about 100 years ago, Sri Aurobindo Ghosh, he was in south of India, and a lot of his time was under British era in India. So his writings were both mystical, socio-political, all of those things at the same time. And he wrote in English, which is, even for me, it's such a boon, because he was able to go deeper into those essences and those subtleties that people had gone there in the past. In India, they had only written in Sanskrit, and so and which what they actually mean and how they translate to is varies over time. So when I talk about when I sit with this essence of the consciousness of the divine will, one of the essences that come to me is the nature of light and dark in some sense. And I mean light and dark not from a perspective of sort of any kind of connotations of good and bad or right and wrong. And that's another thing about these mystical traditions, is that they sort of like move beyond that, right? Everything becomes, in a way, manifestation of the divine. Um, so if any of you had the chance to read that short, a paragraph that Renée Sharon just sent out, I guess maybe today or a couple of days ago, um, there it talks about how divine sort of goes into these consecutive concealing of oneself to manifest in the real world. So dark is nothing but just a higher density of light, or in another way, it is just a shade of light. So you can imagine, so it's essentially all of this in some way just becomes the play of light in that way. And within that, when we fundamentally talk about matter, matter as in the grossest of substance, right? Matter also as in the bodies and the different vehicles that uh, encapsulate a consciousness in the day-to-day world, in the human world, as we call it. So the matter is inherently built of forces. So each matter inherently has some kind of a force associated with it, whether it's in the potential state or it's in the kinetic state, but inherently there's a force that is associated in the matter. And very closely related with this is the idea of desire. So desire is nothing but the consciousness and the vital energy all combined that lies in a matter. So you can imagine, essentially the force inside the matter is willing to express itself. So in a way, the matter is always trying to express itself. And so you can have collection of matter as humans, we are built of like these individual cell particles and individual neurons and neuronal structure and how they come together. It has fundamental, each of those units have fundamental energy and a fundamental force that's trying to express itself. And so the nature of the light or the nature of the divine will is essentially to bring harmony to these collection of matter. And so this is a whole spectrum that actually unfolds. Light or divine will in that sense has an essence of strength associated with it. There's an inherent force in light itself. And that force is a is the force of love in these traditions, in my tradition. It's the force of love that harmonizes the energies and the forces that are inherently present in the matter. And so this is essentially where, I would like to sort of shape the theme of this consciousness of the divine will is essentially that particular consciousness that brings forth an harmonization of these multiplicity of forces inherent in the matter itself. So when we say the consciousness is obscured and the divine also unfolds and expresses itself in that way where it conceals the consciousness. So when the consciousness is concealed, there's inherently a chaotic nature to these forces of matter. So every, you can imagine like matter being like every little tiny particle that's just trying to express itself in the best way possible. And every matter is doing it independently of every other particle and every other the force present in the particle. And so it creates this chaotic field. And the inherent nature of consciousness is that it brings harmonization to that. And so we always kind of like play this part where, as humans, what we say is we kind of like carry the middle road. We are carrying this road where on one side we have these forces of matter, and on the other side we have this consciousness of the divine will, and we are right in the middle and trying to bring that together. So where we experience both chaos as well as harmony at the same time. And so this is where I want to talk about the nature of that force itself, the force that is present in the matter itself, and also how that connects with desire. So as craving of the life force that's trying to express itself, it sublimes itself and it reaches our heart. It becomes the craving of the heart. And that craving of the heart has that quality of the desire, that passion of the heart. There's an inherent quality of desire to it. And then it further sublimes and it reaches our intellectual mind. And the intellectual mind creates whole ideas of stories and associated passions and other associations and so on. And then it becomes a desire that is actually rooted by the mind itself. And so these are the three key things, three key aspects to actually consider, right? So there is one, the fundamental craving, the life force that exists in the matter itself. The second aspect is the heart, which in this case brings forth that essence of desire. And the heart also plays a role in the sense of divine will and divine consciousness as well. And then when it more sublimes even further, when it reaches our intellectual mind, the mind where it creates those stories, the mind also plays a different role, a role that is more associated with the divine will, and we call it the buddhi, or the divine intellect, or the discernment process, as we call it. And so there is an inherent desire to the matter itself that's trying to express. Now, on the other side, there's an inherent desire of the soul that is actually trying to be in the image of the divine will itself. So in this case, the same faculties that we have, the heart, the mind, and so on. So it starts with the mind, the intellectual, the buddhi aspect of the mind, and it brings forth a discernment element to it. So when that discernment is firmly rooted, not in the forces of the matter, but firmly rooted in the force, in the inherent light of spirit, then that particular consciousness of the divine will can descend into the heart. And when it descends into the heart, it brings forth that harmonization of the matter itself. It brings forth the harmonization of the forces that are in the matter. And what does harmonization look like? Harmonization essentially means that we actually get an awareness of how all of these forces of the matter are actually coming together. So there's an inherent quality of awareness to it. Like we in the more colloquial way, we see the big picture, right? We see the forms, we see in a more spiritual way, we see the divine mandala. the divine pattern of life that is unfolding. And then there's the second aspect to it, which is the aspect of the actual force of harmonization. The actual, and in Kashmiri Shaivism, we have a few different names for it. So we either call it the skanda. Skanda is the inherent vibration, or Shakti. Shakti is the inherent force. So the force and vibration, they actually come together. Every force carries a sense of vibration to it. So you might have heard the word Shakti. So Shakti is that inherent forces that lie in every manifestation in the universe, in the cosmos. So now, what happens, when when we call the heat of the desire, or the passion of the desire, and that is the difference where instead of that soul desiring, in some ways, a union with the universal, the soul is the desire itself becomes encapsulated by the ego. So you can imagine, if you're talking about this universal, absolute, infinite experience, and that is the nature of soul that has awareness of that infinite, universal, eternal, omnipresent essence, and the soul that is also, sitting right in between that and the matter itself, the very vehicle that actually carries it. Then one can imagine ego being some kind of an encasing, almost, some kind of a shell that covers, and it creates boundaries within that. Now, again, in the Kashmiri Shaivism tradition, we would call it that the divine, the absolute, is concealing itself to actually experience oneself as a personality, as an ego, as what we call Purusha, as a finite being who has finiteness of abilities, finiteness of time, finiteness of space, and so on. And so when the desire goes towards meeting that particular ego, then moves away from the desire of receiving that conscious will to achieve that harmonization towards something more like a perfection of the personality that is encapsulating it. And so this is a very subtle point. So there's the desire that is liberating, there's a desire that is harmonizing, and then there's a desire that is perfecting of the vehicle in which it is moving with. So, a lot of our aspirations and ambitions in the world are actually geared towards some kind of a perfection, right? We're trying to achieve some kind of perfection, either perfection of self, perfection of our environment, perfection of our relationships, perfection of some sort. And the quality of that perfection is very, very much rooted in the ego itself, right? And when I say ego, I specifically mean the vehicle that is carrying us, that is carrying the particular story of the humanity, of one particular person, and of this whole experience of humanity. And so in that perfection, through a limited mind, and again, that is also another part of ego, right? It's limiting not just our physical abilities, it's limiting our emotional self, it's limiting our vital self, it's limiting our discernment, our intellectual intelligence self as well. And through that limitation, the way we understand, the way we perceive the perfection of any kind of reality is where the desire gets oriented towards, right? So now, so as I'm describing this, there's two processes that are happening at the same time, right? So there's a process, there is a sort of like an evolutionary process. The evolutionary process is where the desire, the force inherent in the matter itself is trying to find an expression, right? So there is the matter that's trying to express itself, and it moves through the heart as a sense of passion, and then it moves to the mind in which it creates this world and creates this reality that's trying to express itself. So that's the evolutionary process. And then there's the another process that is happening, which is the involution process, where the consciousness of the divine will, through that awareness and through that discernment of our mind, enters us and meets us in the heart, which creates this harmonization, right? So there's involution and so there's a evolutionary force within us, and there's also an involutionary force within us. And humanity is playing that role where we are trying to find a balance, a sort of a meeting point between both these evolutionary forces as well as involutionary forces. And as it is said in many traditions, there's fundamentally two ways in which humans make a choice in how they respond to these meeting of these forces. So one is the choice of the inner peace or silence. So this is a choice where a human who's conscious of these involutionary and evolutionary forces, they go into what we call tapasya, or intense meditation, intense burning of the desire itself, so burning of the forces of the matter itself, to reach a sense of inner peace, inner silence. And these are the ways in which the person who chooses that path, they actually rejects external stimulation, and they completely go inside in many ways, and their entire experience of life is to actually how can they actually receive that sense of the evolutionary force that is coming from the divine, from the will of the divine, and to bring it down into the body and bring it down all the way at the bottom of the body, where every force that is not of that nature is completely disseminated, it's completely annihilated. And one thing I want to preempt this by saying is that as we step into that process of meeting that consciousness of the divine will, we are really stepping into the process of self-annihilation and self-assimilation. And what that means is that annihilation is not the association of a actual self, of a real self. It's the annihilation of the ego, the various stories that we have created around it, the various forces of the emotional nature, the actual nature that we have built around it. So it's really the annihilation of that. But it really is an annihilation of all of that that contains and makes us be who we are in the world, so so to speak. The second part, typically as it is said, is that where the individual loses themselves into the divine will. So this is essentially that point of recognition that every force that is inherent in the matter is not separate from the divine itself. It's actually part of the divine will. And when we can actually truly understand the power of that particular statement, there is an automatic expansion of the awareness. There's an automatic sense of recognizing all the blocks that the ego has actually put in front of itself to conceal itself. And there's an annihilation again of that ego, where the awareness becomes so expansive and so personal but impersonal. The awareness starts settling itself in every manifestation of reality that is. And at that moment, in that moment of realization, there's a natural harmonization that happens within the forces of the body, where the individual, or the sense of individual initiation, or any essence of individuality, is completely annihilated, and we lose ourselves in the divine will. And so this is the path that many people on the spiritual path follow when they're actually out and about in the world as well. Because then everything just becomes an expression of the divine will. There's no real separation. There is, and that is what is. And in Sanskrit, we call the fundamental essence of this particular force that I have been talking about, the fundamental essence of the force that lies inherent and generally concealed in matter, and the fundamental force that is of the divine will, that fundamental force of light, the fundamental nature of that is what we call Sat, Chit, Anand. So what that means is that it is fundamentally true. So that is the Sat. So it's the essence of the truth itself. Chit, It is fundamentally conscious. So that means it is not just aware of itself, but it is also enacting itself in all these different ways. And then Anand is joy or bliss. So it's fundamentally joyful and fundamentally blissful. And so, and for me, I know recognition of that the fundamental essence of these forces is just Sat Chit Anand, is somehow liberating in its essence, right? Because, there is no doubting that, any particular expression of life is not joyful or is not truthful or is not conscious, right? It is. And once we recognize that, then we can also come to love ourselves. We can also come to love each other. We can, come to love the story of life that is given to us, in this time frame, in this space and time. And so, really, just bringing that back in, so this is one quote that I read somewhere, and I was like, this is so beautifully describes this consciousness of the divine will. Is that consciousness of the divine will is not just when a lower self falls in love with a higher self, when we recognize that there is a sense of a higher self, there is a sense of this divinity that exists that is much beyond any particular individual, but also that essence when the higher self falls in love with the lower self, and the higher self recognizes that the lower self is just a vehicle of its own expression. So I pause there. Um, and I think one thing I want to say, so that particular essence is what we would call purity in some sense. Like that Sat Chit Anand is what is fundamentally pure. So I pause here and just open up the space. And thank you for sharing this time with me.
Mm. Finish my last little note here. Great. Thank you so much. Anna, can you make it possible for us to have gallery view somehow? I'm just not finding it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great. Wow. Wow. I almost wonder if we could look at what you said at the end, that this consciousness of divine will is not just when our lower personal self falls in love with the divine, but also when the divine falls in love with this lower personal self. I'm not even sure if I can quite form it into a sentence, but does it have to do something with the fact that this lower personal self of ours becomes filled with enough light from the way that we use, let's say, our soul energy, our spiritual energy, the way that we use our mind, mental energy, and our heart caring energy, as well as the way that we even act in the world with our physical bodies, that becomes enough filled with light that the higher self can fall in love with it. Is it something like that you're talking about? Because you talked about purification, and to me, impurity stops the flow of light.
Mm-hmm.
So as we become more pure, more refined, it seems as though light would be able to flow through unimpeded, maybe like a pane of clear glass, for example, or a crystal.
Yeah.
And that's for you, but also for everybody else. What you might think of this last statement he was making about consciousness of divine will not just being our lower self falling in love with the divine, but the divine falling in love with our more personal self as well. Piyush?
Yeah, thank you, Renee. I think you said it very beautifully. I would love to hear how it's received by others as well, and I think that is actually one essence of that as well. Um, is that essence of preparation. So there is a sense of preparation, right? I think at least in the current age where we are living in, there's a sense of like doing something, like to reach somewhere, right? To be, when we pray, right? It's an act of praying in a sense of like, we're trying to do something, right? This essence of higher self or the divine falling in love with the lower self is really one way to say that when we are just true to our path, and I think this is where it actually connects to next week's topic as well. When we are true to our path, in a sense of, when we are committed to that process of purification, as you were saying, Renee, then the body can receive grace from divine. And so it's that essence of grace, which is sort of quite mystical. It's a quite mystical process. It doesn't One cannot force it. One cannot time it or plan for it, but it happens. The thing is that it's seen and it's noticed happening when the bodies are in a place where it can receive it, because that essence of the divine grace is, for the lack of better word, it can be quite intense. If you're not prepared for it. So it's the difference between, I guess, like a psychotic break and an enlightenment in some sense. So yeah, and and there's also this essence. Actually, I was sorry. Go ahead. Somebody. Yeah. So there was this another essence that I was connecting with earlier today. We were sitting in a group. It was a group of family constellations, but there was something that was going on where somebody said this, right, that if people knew that the work that they're doing in the world, or whenever they're taking any kind of decision that requires them to have faith in something, right, in themselves and their aspiration and their preparation or anything, it is so fundamentally beautiful to recognize that you're not alone in actually taking that step, and that you're actually joined by not just the people, your family, friends, family, like whoever is supporting you or not, but you're also joined by, these subtle, beings, whose role is fundamentally for you to actually take that, to help you take that step. And so that is also an essence where, we move away from kind of like being encapsulated in some sense, and in a higher density of light, and opening ourselves to this like more expansive, more vibrant essence of light, where we feel that we're part of something, and not just part, we're actually being supported by something that's, um, you know, beings that exist beyond ourselves.
Wow, thank you. Yes, please, Diana.
I That was amazing. I mean, that was one of the most powerful expressions that I've heard about divine will. And what I really liked was the inherent and the I forgot the other word. In that not only does it come from inside of us wanting it, but that it comes from divine wanting us. And the whole idea that everything is one with divine, that we don't really need to do anything but become aware that we are one and divine love, and that there is a desire for that that is inherent, because but it's almost like, I love the idea like you said about divine, we're falling in love with our our ego self, as well as wanting to love our higher self, and that there's no difference. And so I really appreciated how you brought that all together, and to really see that who we are as we are is divine love. And I do my prayers and my meditation to remind my ego self to surrender to divine love, and divine will, but it's like it's there all the time, and it's resting in that with faith and trust as well as working toward it. So I really appreciated your talk. It was really clarifying for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Diana. Beautiful.
I really appreciate. Sorry.
Go ahead, Shua.
Yes, I want to say I really appreciate the perspective, and I feel like the consciousness is one of the key words that being recently constantly been popping up, like to me recently through different practice and reading, and it's really powerful of being conscious of not only like how you feel, but also like you see, right? It's being conscious of like standing outside of yourself to see yourself, and then through that process of removing yourself from like you see it, you smell it, or like you happy or you anger with it, but then remove that me, like that lower self in that process, then it becomes see, it becomes feel, it becomes smell, it becomes a flow of energy. And this perspective, that energy will connect you closer to the divine self, in the way that it's, like you said, it's less trapped in the ego of your lower self. In a way, you're becoming all together with the broader, the divine will. So I think it's very beautiful. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Shua. You know, as you're saying that, one thing it reminds me is that that's the part of non-judgment. It's the part of yeah, it's the part of one aspect of love is non-judgment, and it's the part of that time, in a way, that flow state, as people call it, or the timelessness, where there is really an experience of something, and then there's the moving into that experience, and that's what it is, and that's what it always has been, and that's the nature of truth. So that's what we call Sat Chit Anand. So truth, consciousness is fundamentally truth and joyful, and then again, truth is fundamentally conscious and joyful. So yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Beautiful.
Does this match up for other people with any concepts you've had of divine will and how we might be conscious of it? Or is it sounding different? Just kind of curious.
For me, it's pretty different. I mean, I haven't explored a concept of divine will, but I am more so just familiar with the words divine and will as separate, or their meanings separately. So it's really interesting. And thank you, Piyush, for giving this really cool concept and way to think about them coming together. I think for me, it might help to clarify, maybe, do you have like an example of you in your lifetime experiencing a progress of divine will and of your ego self and your divine self kind of coming as one?
Yeah, thank you. Good question.
What a great question.
Yeah, thank you. Quite a few experiences, and typically, those experiences also happen as a sense of grace, as I was saying. So it's fundamentally, my experience of that also has been that essence that I was sharing of Sat Chit Anand. It's really that experience. I mean, in the most, I guess, like, in a way to describe it, it's that experience where suddenly everything makes sense. It's like there isn't a sense of like why this exists or why this doesn't exist, right? There isn't a kind of like escaping something or moving towards something. It's a really encapsulating and encompassing experience of that. And typically, one thing I noticed is that it starts with me asking for it, right? And that's the preparation stage. Like there's an intention, right? You might have heard that word. There is a lot of power in intention, because intention really, not only sends, it really sends the signal that, hey, like this is where I'm moving, right? Now, intention does not guarantee that one will start having those experiences and move into that, but it does prepare. It does set us in a motion where suddenly there's like that moment of grace where everything just makes sense, and where these forces, and I think Shua was also said this in such a beautiful way about whatever those experiences are, like sadness, anger, and stuff. Suddenly, like there's just a um, you know, yes, we see it, but we also move into it. And because of that movement, they are not something separate from us, and they like everything just has a role that it plays. Now, so that's actually like, I guess like the the most complete answer that I could imagine for that. But in a more tangible way, in a way that as another part of I was talking about like the involution and the evolutionary forces as a part of the like our journey as a humans journey as well to reach for that, right? There's also, at least for me, I found that meditation and having a practice of meditation, and not just meditation in a sense of like as a way of sitting, but there's kind of like a guiding in that meditation. Now that guiding generally, traditionally used to come from a teacher, a guru, and so on. Nowadays, if we have gurus, it's pretty amazing. And if we don't, then there's a lot of ways in which, that information is accessible, and many of the ways that, Renee also tends that space, for that kind of thing to happen. Right? And I mean, if and maybe even more tangibly, when people do yoga, right, and when people talk about specifically uh, in the way that energy rises up in the body, and like it starts purifying certain things. So there's also a process around that as well. So what I found is that in myself, as I go into this process of kind of like, and it's almost like a daily hygiene, right? Like as a process of like just purifying these different aspects of um, energies within myself, in terms of what they mean. There is also a natural harmonization, right? So, going back to that concept, right? So the essence of the body, like I'm not even talking anything like esoteric or anything, like really just fundamentally like a body is made of cells, right? And that each cell has a consciousness in itself, right? I mean, we've all like these cells are the same cells that exist in an amoeba, for instance, right? An amoeba has a consciousness. It does certain things in an automatic way. It's aware of certain things and so on, right? Similarly, like each cell is conscious and each cell wants to express that, right? And when they are not in harmony, like we feel it, right? I mean, I feel it as either a constriction or a heat or an energy. And when it's really not in harmony, when it goes, when it's like trying to actually bring us into some recognition, we also get diseases, right? And cancer is one of those diseases where, certain bodies, certain cells actually, have a life of their own in some ways, right? They multiply. So that's also a part of that as well, right? So this essence where, so maybe not to that level, but like, at least in like certain ways where energies in the bodies are just, what's the word, discordant or just not harmonious. So, like any time when we like work with that, and when we allow ourselves, be open ourselves to some kind of a some kind of an intelligent thought, some kind of like an illumination process, there's naturally also an harmonization, right? So anytime that happens, right? I mean, it can happen as a release, like when we do grief work, like, shaking, dancing, moving, taking a walk, like it can happen through that. Or it can happen when we just feel like very much, um, in love with something, right? When we are appreciating beauty, or when we actually experience, even on our interpersonal level, that essence of love, right? So all those are small ways in which that happens, but how do we prepare our bodies to experience that more and more, right? And that is an experience of, that is something that there's also practice involved with that. I hope that sort of touches on your answer.
Somebody was asking me today when I was mentioning what our topic for this gathering would be. She asked the question, well, is anything not in alignment with divine will? Which I think it seems to me has maybe two different answers. I mean, relatively speaking, it seems to me as if the divine is going to make use of absolutely anything that happens in the world as a way to rebalance and reharmonize things. And yet, there are things that we can do that really is going to jar us and separate us from the consciousness of divine will within ourselves, our own consciousness of it. And that seems to me to be the deliberate will or wish or effort to do violence, to do harm to another. Seems to me probably the surest way to cut myself off from any kind of awareness of that harmony, because you talked of divine will having to do with harmonization. And so that deliberate will to do harm seems to be a real impediment to this flow of light that awareness of divine will seems to indicate to me. And I wonder what others might think about that. Yeah, Nancy?
Recently, the indigenous people have been telling me that it's not climate change, but it's a way of the earth purifying itself. And so I had been thinking of all the harm that the changing climate is doing to people, especially in Africa and Asia, where it's too hot and then it's flooding and they don't have the resources. And then when I was told that it's a way of purifying, I don't quite know, but it sounds like that could be divine will. It's another way of thinking of it, I guess. I didn't know take that.
That feels to me like one of those instances of so much violence being put to the use of the divine will to reharmonize everything. Maybe.
You know, so there's also an essence, there's also an essence to that, and this comes back to that essence of non-judgment as well. So violence is judgment, like judgment is violence. When we say something is bad and something is good, then we naturally want to move towards good away from the bad, right? And in the extreme cases, we want that bad to just go away, to disappear. Like that's where we step into violence to kill something, right? But and an analogy that actually comes to me, right? Like when when we think like more in the cosmic level, right? Like like all the stars and the planets and the asteroids and so on, right? I mean, and this is kind of like an imagination exercise, right? Like if you imagine yourself being caught in an asteroid field or something, right? Like where there's all these like huge rocks that are like just passing by you, right? It's chaotic. It's it's like what you can't make sense of that, right? It's everything's just hitting you in so many different ways, right? But when you actually step back and you can actually see like, the whole thing that exists, right? Just pure awareness in that way. There's some beauty to it in the ways it's unfolding, right? There is there's a rhythm to it. It's not all arbitrary and, outside this whole cosmic level, right? And we see that, in our daily lives too, right? When we're caught in something, it's like intense and it's chaotic sometimes. It's, any of the experiences really. But like when we really like surrender ourselves to that, right? And we like our awareness expands, then we can see the whole picture, right? And in that surrender, we are also not separate from it, right? And that's another thing. It's not like an individual's job, like an ego's job to bring things together necessarily. Or if I was to say it more accurately, it's not always the ego's job to bring things together, right? We are also part of this. We are in the flow of this divine will. We are inherently a part of it. So and when we step into this, we stop thinking in terms of like, like, oh, this is harmony, or this is disharmony, or anything like that. We just let ourselves, and that's why it's a process of self-annihilation in that way as well. So these dualities that we talk about, it could very well be true that the climate crisis is, the Earth's way of purifying ourselves, and when we lose ourselves in that, if that is true, and if that is divine consciousness, and if we lose ourselves in that, then even the thought of that Earth is doing, like, there's anything outside that purview, like, there is a climate crisis and there's the Earth ways of rectifying it, like all of those thoughts also fall away, right? We just step into our own, as we'll talk about it next time, we just step into our own soul and our own destiny with it. So these are, I think in the end, these are all intellect's way of like figuring it out, right? But in, we are part of it. We are in it.
Oh, well, I'm looking at the time, and I'd love to give everyone who'd like the opportunity to just mention a takeaway that you'll leave this conversation with. And I'll just go ahead and unmute, and we'd love to hear just a little brief something.
I'd like to just say that I really like that paragraph that our speaker wrote that was on the email you sent announcing it. I thought it was very clear, and it was very, I realize it's not original to him, but he seems to have written it. So anyway, that was a good introduction to the talk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.
I want to say thank you, Piyush, for bringing this idea to the conversation circle. And my takeaway is sometimes you need to do less and just shift your awareness for more change to happen.
Yeah. And thank you. And I think my takeaway is, I think I'm always trying to save and rescue, and I think it is caught up in ego more than I ever suspected. And I think I should always think and wonder about what is the divine wish, and how to go with it. So, new thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Help to reduce our Atlas complexes a little bit, maybe. Who else?
I'll go ahead and thank you, Piyush. The parallels that I found between my Catholic faith and the fact that the higher self really does love the lower self, because God loved us before we ever knew him and loved him. So I find that parallel quite positive. Amen.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Mm-hmm.
I will add another takeaway too. Just through different practice and different theory and different religious, seems like all pointing towards a similar philosophy in a direction, in a way that, not each religious are a destiny, but they're all path. leading us to maybe the same field on the other end. So I appreciate that.
Beautiful. Anybody else before we close the meeting? It's always so lovely to just listen, I know. Just soak it all in. Anna has her almanac, I believe, and so Anna, if you could read for us what we're going to do next week, and then I'll see if there's anybody particular who would like to give Piyush a vote of thanks. I think we already kind of have, but if anybody wants to add another vote of thanks after Anna tells us the exact title of the topic that Piyush is going to present on for us next week.
So next week we'll hear Piyush again on Svadharma, our true calling. And the quote for that week is, "There is work for all of us, and there is special work for each," by John Ruskin.
Thank you. Anybody want to give Piyush a vote of thanks? I would like to thank you, Piyush, for the luminosity that you bring. I feel as if you call upon your higher light in some way when you speak with us. And something comes through to, I think, each of us in different ways that each of us can interpret for ourselves. There's enough universality to what you're saying that it can be appreciated by us, whether we're coming from a non-religious tradition, of a Buddhist perspective, Catholic, you're from Hindu, if it's somebody who's maybe more associated with Taoism, maybe they've been Unitarians in their lives, whatever. There's something that you say for each of us, I think, that resonates. And I really want to thank you for that light.
Thank you so much, Renee, and thank you, everyone. It's such a blessing to be here and share this book with you. Thank you.
Thank
Aloha.
you.
Mhm.
Aloha.
Thank you.